Ladies and gentlemen, you're rocking with a GOAT. Kenn Dowell giving you motivation for growth. 2 toes down, he keep it realer than most. He do it for the culture, that's always the goal. This is Strategic Moves with Kenn Dowell. This is Strategic Moves with Kenn.
I want to welcome you to our very first podcast today. You are with Strategic Moves. I'm your host, Kenn Dowell. And today we want to talk a bit about faith without works. I think people today talk about how much they want to get out here and do things. People feel that they, in their minds, believe that if I believe something hard enough that it'll happen. You have to actually put the work in. And so my guest that I have today is somebody that I believe has been not only believing in herself and doing what it takes, but also has been actually putting the work in. And she's been a person that's been around for a long time in my life and been able to help me through quite a bit of issues. So I would like to introduce everyone today to Dr. Jackie Chisholm.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it.
I was going to read your resume, but your resume is so long. So what I will say is that I do know that you have been around for quite a bit. You have several degrees. So I'm going to let you tell us your degrees.
Okay, so the bachelor's in medical anthropology, and the master's in psychological anthropology, and the PH.D. is in psychological anthropology.
And what is that?
What we basically tell people is cross-cultural psych. Mm-hmm. And I give people an example in New Guinea. This is one of the things that I learned when I was in school. So in Papua New Guinea, if a woman complains about her heart hurting, mm-hmm. then it means her husband's cheating on her. Take the same woman in the United States, they would run tests on her heart.
One more time.
Sure. So a woman comes to a doctor and says, I have a pain in my heart. Mm-hmm. In Western medicine, they would run a series of tests, EKGs, they do blood work. Well, in Papua New Guinea, that physician knows that her husband is cheating on her.
Really? Mm-hmm. Is that a fact?
Yes.
Really?
It's cultural.
That's deep. Before we get into your degrees, give me a background on yourself. You grew up on the southeast side of town, right? You grew up and went to John Hay?
No,
you went to Kennedy. Right. Let me
Kennedy.
get that right. You went to Kennedy. That's correct.
Right. Let's see. My father and mother lived on Scoville. That's where I was born.
Okay.
And then we moved from Scoville to 93rd. This was after my mom got a divorce. 93rd in Kinsman, and 123rd in Kinsman, and then 143rd in Kinsman. So that's where I was when I went to Kennedy. It was 143rd in Kinsman.
143rd in Kinsman. And you say your mom and dad got a divorce. So
they got a divorce because of domestic violence.
Oh, so you grew up single parent with your mom? Mm-hmm. And what was it like growing up in a violent household with a lot of violence?
That was really difficult. I remember my sister, my older sister, who's 3 years older than I am, her name is Karen. Mm-hmm. Karen has more memories than I do. Mm-hmm. I just remember jumping on Daddy one night when he was beating Mama and walking on eggshells a lot because you never knew what kind of took them off. The proudest day for me was the day that my mother decided she was tired. Mm-hmm. And she had 3 children. I think all of us were under the age of 11. When she walked out. And my father, he would go to work, but every Friday he'd come home, change clothes, and we wouldn't see him again until Monday. And it was because he was spending time with his other family. He had a woman and her children he was taking care of. And during one of these weekends, my mother packed all our stuff.
Wow.
Put his stuff on we used to live on the second floor of a house, packed his stuff in a garbage bag and put it on the porch, and we were gone.
Wow.
So when he came home Monday, we were gone.
Really?
That was one of my proudest moments of my mom. That took a lot to be a single parent with 3 children under the age of 11. Mm-hmm. And her husband, for whatever reason, decided that he didn't want the responsibility. Better yet, he wanted the responsibility of another woman's family. He didn't want the responsibility of his own children.
Wow. That had to be hurtful.
Yeah, she was. But what I think she made the decision that it was hard. Raising 3 small children by herself. She didn't drive, so she used to take buses. She used to work at Charity. She was a surgical technician. And she started dating this guy who was the son of these people who had a store. Before there was credit cards, you used to get credit at a store.
Correct.
Okay, so the store was down the street from where we lived. And my mother used to go there and get credit so we'd have some food. And so she met him. She decided to marry him. And I think the reason she decided to marry him was to put a roof over her children's head. The problem is he was an alcoholic. So we went from domestic violence in the household to alcoholic. There were times you didn't know if he was going to burn the house down. I laugh about it now, but it wasn't fun. And people would say, oh, I saw your stepfather staggering down the street. And I would say, that's not my stepfather, it's my mother's husband. I had nothing to do with that. There was one time I distinctly remember with him, at some point, I assume we're going to get into this conversation. Being first generation college student, the more you learn, the more you become different from the people in your household. And so he used to say things about, oh, you think you're so smart. Oh, you think you're so smart. And then there was one day I came home, I was living at my mother's house at the time, and he knocked on my door. He wanted to have sex with me.
Really?
Yes. And so I started sleeping with a chair under my door, and I had to get out of that. That's how I got married the first time, was to get out that household.
Wow. Now that's really deep. You're talking about getting out of the fire into the frying pan. I mean,
And
really.
I think at the time my mother made that decision, it was hard for me to accept it at the time, because it was like, why would you leave a man who was beating you to go to a person who was an alcoholic? And at the time, my thought was, she thought she could control him. And the reality is that, no, she couldn't. But given her circumstances, my father wasn't paying child support. When they got a divorce, he had a lawyer, she didn't. And so I think he only had to pay $10 per child per week, and couldn't figure out how to do that while he was traveling, doing stuff. And I think he said, her second husband said, I will buy you a house. And she said, okay. And I think that was her, if I were being fair to my mother, because at the time it was hard being fair when you knew that you're bringing an alcoholic into the household with 3 girls. But if being fair to my mom, I don't think she felt she had any options. And that was her best option. And so he did what he said he was going to do. He put a roof over her head. But it came with all these other things that she had to deal with.
So how long did y'all deal with that?
Until she died.
Really?
Yeah, she died at the age of 53. And 3 weeks later, he was remarried to somebody in Tennessee. I know. And then what I heard, it's one of those things, being careful what you wish for. So he apparently was going down to Tennessee periodically to see his woman. And so 3 weeks after Mama died, we literally just put her in the ground, her body in the ground, and he was on his way to Tennessee. So I heard that she was a school teacher or a principal of a school, and he used to come to her class drunk. And God knows my heart. First thought I had was, see, that's what happens when you do stuff like that. But eventually, a lesson that I learned from him, he had cirrhosis of the liver. He should have died, but instead he buried my mother. And it's not his fault that my mother died. She had a heart condition. But my mother the whole time kept saying, she kept thinking that he was going to die first because he had cirrhosis of the liver. So when she wrote her will, the will was, if she died, she got everything. If he died, she got everything. She didn't think she was going to die first. So when she died, and she didn't tell us what the will, she kept telling us, if anything happens to me, he's going to sell the house, he's going to take half, and the other half that you all will get. It's not what she put in her will. And so it's always, number one, the Bible says, be careful about digging ditches.
Right.
Because she dug that ditch thinking that he was going to fall in it, and she was one that did instead.
That had to be a crazy experience growing up.
It was so chaotic. Growing up with those kinds of experience, but number one, with domestic violence in the household, but then an alcoholic who eventually starts approaching me, I just wanted peace. I wanted stability. College for me, school for me was stability. I used to say, as long as I could get to class, I was blessed to have some phenomenal teachers, people who supported me. And that's from elementary school through college. That was my haven. A book was my haven. I used to go to the library and sit on the floor and read all these books. I would take 8 of them home and I would hold up in my room because that was my like I said, my haven. I knew early on, and part of it was because my mother kept saying education was important. That's all she preached was education. And part of that was because in her household, my grandfather didn't believe in educating his children, especially not his girls. She wanted to be a nurse. He wouldn't pay for it. She became a surgical technician because she went through a program. And so they paid for it. But that wasn't what she wanted to be, was a nurse. Then some of the lessons that she taught me was, number one, even when she had an opportunity to become a nurse, I think she was afraid to try. And so a good portion of watching my mother and hearing her say education is important, do as I say, not as I do.
Interesting.
So I watched people around me, the neighborhoods that we were in, especially 143rd. Almost all the girls, young women, they focused on men. They focused on, having babies, which made no sense to me. And all I focused on, I'm not going to get stuck here. I'm going to school. I'm going to college. I didn't know where it was going to lead, but it was getting the hell out of
So let's talk about getting out of there and getting able to go to Case. Case is in a average school that most people get an opportunity to go to, especially poor people. So how did that come about, and how did you get opportunity to get into Case Western Reserve?
So here's the funny thing, because we didn't go, we haven't talked about the fact that I was in an abusive relationship from the age of 14 until I was 19. The abuse started a year into it.
With who?
Boyfriend.
At the age of 14, you had a boyfriend at 14?
At the age of 14, I had a boyfriend.
So you just said you wasn't studying boys.
Popped up. So he was my sister's boyfriend's best friend.
Oh, that's
and so when he came over, he brought him, so we started talking, and it was stupid. He was 6 years older than I was, so he should have been in prison.
Right.
But at the time, my ego was, wow, this older person is interested in me. And he started, remember, we didn't have a lot. He was buying my clothes. He took care of me. He made sure I got to school. He was doing all that stuff. And what I learned from that experience was usually an abuser, what they'll do is they'll start doing all these things for you and pull you away from everybody. They pull you away from your family. They pull you away from your friends. They become your sole source for everything. By the time I figured that out, it was too late. I was involved in that relationship. And like I said, about the age of 15 is when he started beating me. The first time he hit me, I went to hit him back and got hit even harder. And what I, again, learned from that, and you'll hear me say that a lot, is what did I learn from that experience? Because otherwise you're destined potentially to repeat it. What I learned was, when I saw my father beat my mother, in the back of your mind, you start thinking that's normal. And at the time, I didn't realize that. So I had to go into counseling to figure this out. I knew that I wanted better than that. So even though I wasn't one of these people going, oh, I need to have a boyfriend, I got to have one of those. It was, he was there. He made me feel safe until he didn't make me feel safe. And the way that I got out of it, he did not want me to go to school. He didn't want me to go to college. Matter of fact, he said, why don't you wait a year? But I knew if I waited a year, I'd never go. And he called me stupid one day. And this man was kicking my behind. But the minute he called me stupid, I was like, I'm a lot of things. Stupid ain't one of them. And so at that point, it was, what do I need to do to get out of this? You get to the point where you start saying, how did I get here? How did I wind up here? So you ask the question about how did I get to Case? When I was 9 years old, remember we used to go on these field trips. All right, so we went to the orchestra. And I looked across the street and Case was there. And I didn't remember this until I was at Case, when I was a student at Case. And I looked across the street and I said, what is that? And an adult said, that's Case Western Reserve. And I said, I'm going there. I got to Case because that was the only other place I wanted, the only place I applied. My counselors kept saying, you need a backup school. There's no guarantee that you're going to get in the Case. And I was like, they don't know me. I'm going to Case. I eventually, because they told me, I did apply to Cleveland State. But I only wanted Case. Now, if you were to ask the question why, I have no answer for that. I just knew I'm going to Case. If I'm staying in Cleveland, I should tell you I'm a little on the bougie side. I don't know. But my attitude had always been, if that is the best place to go,
I want to go to the best.
I want to go there. Why wouldn't I? Okay. So I applied. And they turned me down. I got this flash letter. Another story real quick. There was a teacher named Kennedy. And it was the major work program. And I was in the math class. And there was some concept that he was writing on the blackboard, and I didn't understand it. And he said, if you don't know that, he said, if you don't understand that, you don't belong here. And there were only 8 of us in the class, and these were all like my best friends. And so I was so embarrassed by that comment. So what I did was I picked up my books and I marched to the end of the class, the back of the class, and I was like, I'm just not going to learn anymore, thinking that it's going to hurt his little feelings. Guess what? I stopped learning. And that was, it affected me every math class after that, because I didn't learn what I needed to learn there. So I let my ego get in the way. So there are people who, when they come up against something, they'll say, I can show you better than I can tell you.
Right.
My attitude was, if that's how you feel about me, and I took that, and instead of using it to let me show you what I can do, I just stopped learning.
Wow.
So I had a D in math. Every math class I had after that, I had a D. A's in everything else, but math, I had a D. That's why Kate said no.
Wow.
Because I had all A's and a D. And when I took my ACT, I rated very high in everything but math. So unbeknownst to me, the chair of the math department, Mrs. Mc, called Case and said, you need to meet her. You need to interview her. And so one day she found me and she said, you have an interview with Case Western Reserve. I said, what? And she said, I called them. And I was like, okay. So I went and I talked to them. And then they conditionally admitted me. And I had to get a C or above in math.
Wow.
Okay. I wound up, when I got to Case, I got an A because it was never an issue of ability. It was my attitude about what this man said to me. And when I told him that Case admitted me, his exact words were, oh, I guess they need black students or some crazy, like, because he's a white guy. He said, oh, I didn't expect that at all. I guess they needed black students, more students. Just like that. I was like, oh, okay. Now, fast forward years later, I have my master's. I saw him. I was this close to saying something to him about how he damaged people. He damaged me. And I didn't. I could have, but I didn't. I found out several years later that I was recruiting for Case undergrad. And I went to Kennedy. I went back to Kennedy. And I told the story, didn't put a name to it. And a student came to me afterwards and said, was that, and I'm not going to use his name now, was that? And I said, it is. The person said he did the same thing to me. In that moment, I wrote a letter to the Department of Education for Cleveland Schools and said, you have known for years that this man is a problem. I said, and I gave him the example of what happened with me and the fact that I went back to the school 20 years later.
Wow, and he's still
And
there.
this man, and the damage that he's done, I think they allowed him to retire. But they knew. There's no way they didn't.
I know that guy because he damaged me. I messed up to the A.
Yeah, just
I still ain't got
unconscionable.
over my education because of that.
Unconscionable. But the bottom line for me was Case was the only place I wanted to go.
Case Western Reserve. So how did you get there? You got there on a scholarship? You got there, you paid your way?
Financial aid.
Really?
Yes.
So after all of that, and he said that you got there because you were black and all of that, you still didn't get no black.
It's funny to me because you and I had this conversation. It was funny to me because this would have been during affirmative action.
Wow. Okay.
And so there were a number of us who were there, but it was only like 3% of the population. Case had 5,000 students. So you're not even talking 500 people. You're talking about 200 or 300 people. Right. There was an acknowledgement that we were there and that we were special. And the reason that there was an acknowledgement was because we were put into a program. And it's part of the TRIO program. It's called Special Support Services. So I was immediately enrolled in that. I didn't have a choice. And I'm thankful that I didn't have a choice. They were phenomenal people. And they were the ones who helped us understand what does college require. And they had already made the connections for us. The problem was Case lost that grant the next year. So freshman year, they were there holding our hands. The next year, they were gone.
Wow.
And so we're sitting there going, okay, so how do we do this now? And Case is not, it's my alma mater. I've gotten 3 degrees from there. But if you were to ask me what kind of support did they give you intentionally, I would say not much, other than the support service, and that was a grant. And when the grant was gone, that program was gone. So what was the commitment to students, first generation students like me? None.
Have you think they got better over the years?
No.
Really?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Do I think that it's intentional discrimination? No. Do I think it is willful ignorance? Yes. I do.
I don't know. I don't know. I
don't think
have
they're
a
thinking
hard
about us.
time thinking that people just don't know. These are the smartest people, right?
Yeah, it's not that it's not that they don't know. So let's put it in business terms.
Okay.
Okay, because you
That's probably where
Let's put
more
it in
is
business
it boils down to at the end.
let's put it in business terms.
Okay.
The majority of the students who attend Case Western Reserve are not first generation.
Correct.
The vast majority, probably 80 to 90% are not first generation. So are you going to gear your resources to the 10%? And the reality is probably not. Now, you would if you cared about all of the students on the campus.
Right.
You would make provision for everybody there. But I don't think that's what they were thinking. I think they felt like we took care of them because we had this program. We went and got the grant, and the grant allowed us to hire all these folks. And then the grant was, do I think that they did create a minority program, but not every student who's first generation is minority.
Okay.
Now, majority probably are, but not everybody. So they eventually got another grant for the Minority Scholars Program, and I wound up working for them.
Okay.
So it's not that I think, it's not that I don't think they care. It's not a high priority. That's what I think. It's just not a high priority.
So how did you end up working there?
Okay, so as I say, what happened was when I finished Case, I started working for May Company. I was recruited by May Company to work there and to become a buyer. And I hated that job. And I don't mean like a little bit of hate. I hated every aspect of that job. And that's primarily because of the attitude that people had. I walked in the door thinking that we were all there to help May Company make money and all that other stuff. So we were all in it together. And what I learned in that experience was, no, that person was out for themselves, that person was out for themselves, and they had no problem with throwing you under the bus in order to stand on you. And I had never had that experience before. I'm really Pollyanna. And I wound up quitting. I was pregnant with my first child. My husband and I had gotten married maybe a year and a half, a year before. And I was pregnant, and I was on the verge of losing her because of the stress related to that company. And the doctor said, if you don't quit, he said, you're going to lose your baby. Is that what you want? And I said, no. So I talked to my husband, I quit. And so I put myself through college because as a secretary. And so I knew I had the skill set. So I wound up working for Cleveland Clinic as a floor secretary. And then one day I had been praying, but you and I are going to have a conversation about faith. And so one day I was praying and I was like, God, what is it that you want me to do? Because I have this really nice degree from Case Western Reserve that I still owe money on. And I'm a secretary. I didn't need a degree to be a secretary. And out of the blue, this woman who lived in, I think, Minnesota, who used to be my career counselor at Case, called me. She found me and said the Case had this position available as an undergraduate recruiter. And she said, would you be interested in something like that? And I said, I think I would. And my reason for doing it was because I felt like my experiences could be helpful to students that I would recruit. Okay. And so after, I think, 14 interviews.
14
as in 11 people in the room, everybody getting the opportunity to have conversations with you. But 3 different interviews. Then I got a flush letter again saying, I'm sorry, we have really good candidates, but you didn't get it. And then 3 days later, I got a call from Case saying, offering me the position. I said, hold up, wait a minute. So I got on the phone because I knew people at Case. What happened? So apparently the guy that they offered the position to wanted more money than they were offering. And so I was the second candidate. Excellent. And I was like, you know what? I ain't mad. However God gets it to me. Right. So that was the job that I had initially on campus was undergraduate recruitment.
Oh, so that's where you did all your recruiting of students and that kind of stuff?
For about 3 years. I did that for 3 years. I was the co-coordinator of minority recruitment because remember, when I was there, it was only 3%. Right. When I got there again, it was only 3%, 3 or 4% as an employee. Right. So they hadn't changed. The lady who is the co-coordinator, her name is Linda Steele. Linda and I put together a plan, and we're like, this is what we're going to do. And the university had, again, they had gotten a grant. And the grant was to increase the number of students of color on campus. Okay. So we had this program. It was the first 2 years, no loans. And the second 2 years, you would have loans like everybody else, but the first 2 years, no loans. So Linda and I kept telling them, they gave us what they thought we would be able to do to accomplish. And we kept saying, your estimates are too low. We can do that easily. And so the first year we blew through all of their money. And we told them, we told you your numbers were too low. And then as a result of that, so now year 2, which should have been the second year of the grant, they've gone through all that money. And so what they did was cut it in half. So now the university has to put some money in. And so instead of all of the money, now it was half. And by the third year it was gone. The program was gone. Again. This is what I was saying before.
Yeah.
And I've said this to even people who work at Case. Things cost. It's not enough for you to say that it's important. Anything that's important, you invest money in it. And it's not like they don't have it. They're sitting on $1 billion endowment.
That's correct.
So if this was really of interest to them, serious about it, they would have endowed it. And they still haven't endowed it.
And so being there, what was the best experience you had working there at Case, though?
The best experience of working in Case, especially in recruitment, I wound up going into retention later on. It takes a lot to recruit a student, a first-generation student, because the parents they don't know what college is. They need somebody to help them with the paperwork.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're rocking with a GOAT. Kenn Dowell giving you motivation for growth. 2 toes down, he keep it realer than most. He do it for the culture, that's always the goal. Giving inspiration through information, providing liberation with conversation, giving fresh insight for elevation, cause he knows this is how we reach our greatness. And he riding with the people.